let's see if I can't answer some of your questions at this point. Yes, ma'am?
Do you have any information on the Delta Queen, when that may be back in service?
The Delta Queen, actually I could tell you a lot about what's going on with her. She is in Houma, Louisiana, laid up in a shipyard and has been there since 2016. Of course, she had been over at Chattanooga, Tennessee as a hotel for a while after she stopped running in 2008. Her current owners, which are a consortium of 4 people, actually 4 couples that own her, intend to, and they've actually gotten the exemption from the Safety of Life at Sea law to run her again. The problem is financing. As you may know, Viking River Cruises from Europe is getting ready to launch on the Mississippi River. They're 3 weeks behind right now, and we're all kind of laughing because they built their new longship and they decided it was too small for the river, so they added 2 decks and it won't pass the stability test. Ruh-roh. So we're all kind of laughing about that, but the owners of the Delta Queen are having trouble finding financing because people don't see a viable business plan for her with all the competition. You have American Queen Voyages has 3 boats on the river. You have American Cruise Line that has 4. Viking has 1 that they're getting ready to bring out and 6 more under construction. 6.
Wow.
So it's a flooded market. They have talked about the possibility of 2 things. Making the Delta Queen a permanently moored hotel until such time as this bubble bursts, and then going back to the drawing board. Leaving her non-running and not having a crew is having a profound effect on the boat. It truly is. And then she got broadsided by a hurricane last year and she lost her roof and most of her handrails. The good news there is between insurance and FEMA, she's got a better roof on her now than she ever had when she was running. They were able to engineer it. It's unbelievable. It is completely watertight. And I remember that boat, you could run around with a cup and refill it in a rainstorm. I worked on her for several years. It was that bad, truly. So is she going to come back eventually? But as what we don't know at this point. But we're very hopeful that she'll be back. And when I say we, 2 of the owners I'm very good friends with. And we've talked a great deal about it. Matter of fact, we even took the whistles off her Calliope to a Calliope festival in Peru, Indiana this year and played it for the first time since she ran in 2008. Wow. And that got a lot of interest in what's going on. So it's going to take somebody with a lot of vision and money to make it happen. They're going to protect the boat until such time as it can be done. And she's perfectly capable of running again. It's like turning off a car, except they did everything you needed to do. They drained everything, they got everything ready so that all you have to do is put the fuel and the water back and she could run.
Wow.
Probably replace the boilers, but she could run. Yes, ma'am?
Why are the steamboats she and not he? How did that name come about?
Well, we're not going to go back to Storyville for that, so just so you know it's safe. Actually, that goes back to the Viking days of calling vessels she. The Vikings would do that in honor of their girlfriends and their wives that they left behind, and it has stuck going forward. A lot of things in early navigation terminology stuck in the same way, and that's why they're referred to as she. Now, I have also heard that it takes a whole crew of men and a lot of paint to keep her looking good, but I don't buy into that. I don't buy into that one. Yes, ma'am?
Okay, I read a little bit about the biggest disaster of a riverboat during the Civil War, I think, or after.
Right after the Civil War,
Right
the steamer
after.
Sultana.
You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, the Sultana was a boat that was owned by a man by the name of J. Cass Mason. He was a steamboat captain and an investor in several boats. When the Civil War hit, that was a big hit to him because J. Cass Mason was from Natchez, Mississippi. Well, as we all know, during the Civil War, most of the river and water-based battles happened on the lower Mississippi, Tennessee, and parts of the Ohio River. So he wasn't able to run his boats during the war. Matter of fact, 2 of them were requisitioned by Southern forces and used in the war. When the war was over, the federal government was offering a huge sum to bring northern prisoners of war back north. So J. Cass Mason thought, hey, the Sultana, we'll fire her up. I can load tons of people on here. And he got a little greedy, and he overloaded the boat with 3,000 people and started to bring her north. By the time they got up to Vicksburg, Mississippi, she had bagged a boiler. Now what that means is the old steamboat boilers were not like a modern boiler of today with any of the safety devices. They had a safety valve to, if they got too much pressure, exhaust it into the atmosphere. But instead, in this case, what they had was a bag where cold water had hit the steel and caused it to expand. When a boiler bags, it generally explodes. and they know this. So what they did, rather than stop the boat, cool her down, lose the money for not delivering the troops on time, they took a piece of steel and pushed it up over the bag, pushed the bag back into the boiler, riveted it in place with steam on the boiler, and guess what happened? That one blew up, but on steamboats you generally had a battery of boilers, meaning 3, 4 boilers together into one steam container called a steam drum that went back to the engines. When one let go, the other 3 let go, and when it did, the superstructure was blown off the boat. People were blown into the river. It was the largest loss of life of any maritime disaster to this day. Happened on the Mississippi River, just above Memphis, Tennessee. It was very sad because that boat should have never had more than 500 people on it. It had over 3,000. These were prisoners of war, which had literally been starved to death. So the ones that could have survived when they got in the river didn't have the strength to swim against the current, were drowned. J. Cass Mason survived and spent the rest of his life in a federal prison. So, but when you think of the Titanic, which is pretty much the second, she eclipsed the Titanic, a little steamboat on the Mississippi River, and it's a pretty sad fact. Gentleman by the name of Gene Saliker wrote a book called Disaster on the Mississippi. And if you want to learn more about the Sultana, I highly suggest, there are 3 books out on the Sultana, but Eric Saliker's is by far the very best I have read on this subject. He actually found 3rd and 4th generation family members to get the family stories of some of the individuals in his book, and it is very well researched. The bad news is if you like picture books, this isn't a good one because there's only one picture known to exist of the boat. Only one, and it was taken at Helena, Arkansas, about 22 hours before the disaster, and you can see everywhere you look on that boat there are people. So imagine, here you are, you've just been released as a prisoner of war, you're shoulder to shoulder with everybody, there's no room to move on this boat. And it's a gruesome looking picture when you know the story. And I do not want to end on that. Somebody please ask a better question. No, I'm sorry.
I'm just curious if there's anybody else here who saw a show on Majestic when it used to come to Newburgh. Anybody else?
No.
They did, they not only did the melodramas, but, and this was a big deal, when they went down the river, they stopped in Newburgh, right at the end of Monroe Street, and did exactly what you said, you know, had music and people out there selling tickets. But they did several things. They do a melodrama, there'd be music, they dance, and when they did the can-can, as a little kid, the whole boat rocked. It was scary because you thought, oh my gosh, we're going to tip over this way, we're going to tip over this way. But it was an amazing thing, and they would go down the river, and then by August, they'd be coming back. So you'd see 2 shows a year, and it was, at that point, run by IU theater students, and they did everything. They sold the tickets, they were the actors and actresses.
The musicians.
They lived on the boat, they did it all. Wow. So it was a really cool thing.
I will one-up you with a unique story on her. Her last season, Kevin Kline was one of the actors. He was an IU grad, and he was an actor on board the Majestic. So you actually had a chance to see stars of stage and screen before they were by going on the Majestic. And her Calliope survives to this day. It is in a circus wagon built in 1976 by the IU Theater Department, the IU Steam Calliope, and it is currently on loan to the Circus Hall of Fame in Peru, Indiana. And although we were going to play it at the Calliope Festival up there earlier this year, the flexible steam line from the boiler to the instrument broke, and on a Friday we couldn't find a flexible steam line anywhere near Peru, but it was in the circus parade on, I think it was the 18th of July. We took it through there, and once again we were almost foiled. I was the player for it, and we had a major heavy thunderstorm warnings and everything, trees blowing all over the place. We had a tree fall down in the parade route an hour before the parade at 9 o'clock in the morning. So we put the parade off for an hour. They cut the tree down, or cut the tree up so that the parade could go through, and we took that thing through there, and it worked. There were no problems that time, but when we got to the festival, she just did not want to work for us. And these things happen. So the Majestic lives on in many ways. I think you had your hand up first, sir. I'll be right back to you.
I understand the Coast Guard's made some changes and there's no overnights on the wooden-type boats.
That is correct, and that goes back to a situation that happened in 1963. There was a British ship the Yarmouth Castle that was on a cruise down in the Caribbean. All wooden superstructure, steel hull, caught fire, 90 lives lost. So up in Washington, D.C., our federal government enacted the 1966 Safety of Life at Sea law. It took them 3 years, kind of like normal, to enact a law. And what it did, and here's where the mistake was written into it, it forbid all vessels, foreign or domestic, to operate from a U.S. port carrying more than 50 overnight passengers if the superstructure was primarily constructed of wood. This is where the Delta Queen comes in, because she is all wood from the hull up, but from the hull down, she's all steel. Matter of fact, her framework is all steel. It's just steel bulkheads and superstructure, or I'm sorry, wood superstructure beyond the steel framing. So what they didn't take into consideration is the Delta Queen was on the inland rivers. You're never anywhere where you're more than a mile away from the bank, and most times you're less than 200 feet away from the bank, and with that boarding stage you could get everybody off safely at every landing. I was a crew member on that boat for 5 years of my career, and I can tell you, every one of us was trained in firefighting safety. We were all trained, and not just, here, look at this is a fire extinguisher. We actually went to a firefighting training school every season before every season started, and we had to put out fires with fire extinguishers with fire hoses pressured up to 100 psi, just like your firemen do here in town. And if you couldn't do that, you couldn't work on the boat. That was required. And we had a crew of 75 on that boat, and no more than 176 passengers. And I used to tell people, you're safer on this boat than you are in your own home, because your home is probably all wood, maybe with brick or brick veneer on it, and you don't have 75 trained firefighters. But why the Delta Queen isn't running is, in 2006, the new owners, Majestic America Line, who bought her at that time, were a non-union operation. Delta Queen Steamboat Company was union. James Oberstar, who was the overseer of the Merchant Marine and Fisheries Committee, who gave the exemption from 1966 up to that point, was from Duluth, Minnesota, the headquarters of the Seafarers International Union, and they greased the wheels, and the Delta Queen doesn't run anymore, which is too bad, because she's the last boat. Yes, she was built for California rivers. She has a single stack. She looks different. But you go in her engine room, her pilot house, and walk her decks, and she's the same as every Mississippi River steamboat, and beautiful. And that was taken away from us. We no longer have that connection to that era. The modern boats are nice. Don't get me wrong. That American Queen, as grand as they come, they can make steel look like anything. But she doesn't have the character. Everything's beautiful and grand, but the character's not there that you get on the Delta Queen. So that's what caused that, was the Yarmouth Castle fire. Well, that was a long story. I believe you had your hand up, ma'am.
Oh, yeah, I wanted to know the years of the Majestic, is
You want to
that?
know how old I am?
Uh,
You want to know how old I am?
no,
Yeah, you do.
Meanwhile, down on the farm.
Mid-60s, I would say, maybe 66, 67, 68 in there.
Okay, and that's how long it ran? And
Well,
did it
I
stop
mean,
in Evansville
it-
also, or
yeah.
just Newburgh?
I don't know. We didn't go to the shows in Evansville. We only,
Right.
we lived in downtown Newburgh, and we just went to the shows here. So I don't know where else it stopped. But it did a whole cruise down and then back, and took all summer to get there, and switched off
Yeah.
students
Okay.
and crews and so on. But it was in the mid-60s that was going on.
Okay.
And there are 3 of us in this room right now who signed letters to the Delta Queen Steamboat Company to try to keep it on the river. Betty Blake,
Betty Blake.
yeah. Yeah, she kept it on the river almost single-handedly for
She did.
many campaigns.
Betty was a neat person. Remember I was talking earlier about the advance man that would go ahead of the showboat, go ahead of the excursion boat, put up the posters? Betty Blake was the last advance man for an excursion boat, the Avalon, which became the Belle of Louisville. And she would go ahead to the town 2 to 3 weeks, pre-sell tickets, put signs up, things like that. Steamboats were kind of in her blood, and her father was a Kentucky state senator. So she knew how to form public opinion. When the Avalon stopped running in 1961, she literally went next door to Green Line Steamers and got a job as a promotions agent for the Delta Queen. And between 1961 and 1974, she became the president of the company. And because of her political background, she knew how to save the boat. You may know this story. 1968, they were going for the second exemption for the Delta Queen, and James Garmetz was the chairman of the Merchant Marine and Fisheries Committee, and he said, there's no way that vote's going to get past me. And Betty Blake got rolls of butcher paper, and everywhere the boat stopped, she went out there with a card table and asked people to sign this petition to save the life of the Delta Queen. Well, she goes up to Washington, D.C., takes Vic Tooker, one of the entertainers, and his banjo, and hits all the bars in D.C. that all the senators and congressmen would go to try to get them on board. And they were like, but nobody can make an end run around Garmetz. He's not going to let us do it. So she got a hold of a congressman over in Illinois, and his name escapes me right now, which doesn't surprise me because I've been testing my brain for about the last hour. Ed Railsback was his name. He had a bill going through to reimburse a postal worker because the town had lost its charter and he was being moved to a different town. They lost their charter because of a flood. And she got him to attach a bill to save the Delta Queen for 2 years to that bill and got around Garmetz. But how she got the attention was all those rolls of butcher tape. She took them out literally to the Capitol building and unfurled the whole mess on the steps and said, this is who wants the Delta Queen saved, and had Vic Tooker play his banjo, and they all came out and started singing river tunes with him, and then they all talked about how great it was to save the Delta Queen, and then Railsback said, I got a bill we can attach it to. Now you know how Washington works. By the way, on the Majestic, she was built in 1924 at Point Pleasant, West Virginia, by Tom Reynolds of Showboat fame. He had about 7 different showboats over the years that his family ran, and he ran the showboat till 1949, when he sold the showboat with a provision that he would run it until his dying day, initially to Kent State University, who ran it for several years, and then they sold it to IU, or sold their ownership to IU. That's when, unfortunately, Captain Reynolds was set to retire, but he actually fell off the towboat and drowned. His family, I mentioned earlier that they're trying to get her up to Point Pleasant. His family still lives in Point Pleasant, and they want to bring it back because they own the land where she was built. And they want to bring her back there for her 100th birthday. So watch your river news, because I have a sneaking suspicion they're going to get their way. They have money to throw behind it, and that generally makes things happen. So keep your eye out for that. Any other questions? Yes?
Yeah, we had a calliope here in Newburgh for years. Do we still have it over in Pleasure Club or Yorkshire?
Somebody was talking about it, I think you were talking about it before
It's
the...
right over on Jefferson Street, or Jennings Street.
Dr. Whitehead's wife.
Schaefer, Strafer?
Stacy.
No. Whitehead.
Stacy Whitehead.
Whitehead.
Yes. I
Her
don't know
dad.
where it has gone to.
Okay, well, I mean, it's somebody down at Williams Lane that owned it,
Yes, he did.
and would play it, I think, in parades that we had.
He took about 50 cruises on the Delta Queen. Yes.
He would,
So we don't know where it is?
I have a question back here, I'll get right to you. Yes, sir? Yes?
the last time the Delta Queen stopped here, which I think Ann will recall as I do, it was a special stop, and the calliope was played for her, and then her calliope played back. And there's not been a riverboat stop here since then, I don't think.
Wow.
It had a keyboard that actually worked.
That's right.
And a
it
roll
also-
player.
It also had tapes
And he would
that you could just
take
stick
it
a
up, the
tape
guy
in,
that owned it.
it would play.
Really?
Guy that owned it would go up to the locks, and he would sit up in the park, and he would play his calliope, and then the riverboat would play its calliope as it went through the locks.
I remember doing that.
Yeah.
I remember doing that. I remember a lockmaster bringing me a hat when I was playing from the Newburgh Lock and Dam. He brought me a red hat with the Corps emblem on it and gave it to me. He goes, I think you won. Well, I didn't know we were in a duel. But
Well, your calliope was a lot bigger than the.
well, we were louder. Louder wins. Yes, sir.
I was interested in the music connection to Storyville and Jelly Roll Morton. I've got a Dixieland group here, and we do a tune called Mildenburg Joys, which
Yeah.
I think was the same thing as Storyville. It was on Lake Pontchartrain, and that's what the song alludes to, is the ladies.
Charlie Strength.
I prefer to say ladies of negotiable virtue. It sounds much nicer.
Mildenburg Joys by,
If you ever get a chance, and the Library of Congress sells, it's a 4 CD set, you may already have it. It's a Jelly Roll Morton 4-CD set where they interview him and he tells the story of how a lot of these songs and the styles and everything came together. I'm going to tell you, if you pick it up, it is very blue. He tells what? No, in detail. Yes, they had those words in the 30s. We didn't think they did, but they
They
did.
didn't sing them.
I'm sorry?
Only in certain company did you sing them.
Yeah, you didn't use those. You didn't use that at the bank or the post office. Well, I don't know. Nowadays at the post office, you might.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
On the Delta Queen, they allowed you to play the Calliope, but they waited until we were way south of St. Louis because it has a range of 5 miles. And so I've always said somewhere down in Arkansas, there are cows going, oh my word, who can play that thing now? But I banged out Dixie, it was okay.
We called that Calliope Capers or Calliope Fun Time if you were on before the early 80s when they changed to Calliope Capers. And we would let the passengers take a hand at it. And you would be amazed at you get 176 passengers on that boat. And because to be on that boat, you have to be of means to afford to be on her. Most people were trained in something musical. You'd be amazed how well some of these people would adapt to a calliope of all things. Sometimes you'd get some pretty good people out of it. And if they were really, really good, we'd probably hire you. And we also gave out the Vox Calliope certificate. Remember that? Where
I have it, yeah.
at the captain's
I
dinner,
have it.
you would get the Vox Calliope certificate for earning your talent, if you will, at the keyboard. And do you remember what it says on the bottom?
No, I have a picture of it.
This document is automatically revocable if said Calliope plays marching through Georgia. Any other questions? I'm going to go ahead and wrap up, but I want to thank you all so much. First of all, for inviting me down, because I get to tell a lot of river stories where I'm from up at the Howard Steamboat Museum. I do. But I don't get to do stuff like this anymore. I have to tell stories, not that I don't like them, but I have to tell the stories of the family, the stories of the shipyard, and I don't get to branch out into like entertainment and early river things and stuff like that near as much as I do. So it's fun for me because my friends are sick of these stories. We all are hearing them for the first time. So thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you,
Worth it to go see this museum,
He's
yeah.
never been to that.
Yeah.
Go.
Yeah, it's
He's
fun.
been, and so is she.
Right.
Yes, you have. I highly recommend it. We're very popular.
And we had
I'm
a
not
great,
going to say what I'm thinking right now.
we had a great host.